They should have said the poet. The poet. They should have said the poet. The poet.
Sending poets.
This is Sending Poets, a podcast about ideas. Our goal is to understand metaphorical truths within the beauty we find in the human experience. My name is John. With me is Bob and Tucker. What's up, fellas?
Morning, guys.
What's up?
And today we are continuing our conversation about LGBT ideas. And I was going to start here. I get these emails, words of the day emails, and there were two words this week that I thought were interesting. One was syncretize. I had not heard that word before. And syncretize is to attempt to amalgamate or reconcile like different things, especially religious beliefs, cultural elements, or schools of thought, how appropriate. Amalgamate, it's also one of the albums by one of my favorite bands, Filter, but I didn't really know what that meant, so I looked that up. Actually, I think I got that in an email as well this week, but that says amalgamate is to combine or unite to form one organization or structure. So, my own personal kind of take is like, well, one form. I mean, I'm really excited about this quote about like single stories not being as helpful, so one form. So I was like, okay, so syncretize. Yeah. I was like, ooh, you guys, what if our goal, is to work on poetizing?
Good cheating.
Yeah. So,
So
I liked how that worked.
Real quick, I think this is it. Meaning the definitions that you brought forward should be center stage. This is because what I really am not a fan of, and I'm not saying we're a component of this, but in general, my observation is picking a side. This side's right. This side is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Picking away. This is the correct. This is the not correct. And I think, John, you've always been like, anti-absolutism, and right. And so I think that
not always. Get it? But yeah,
I see what you did there. I was very nice. Very nice. But this I love those definitions. I think that is the greater good is to see it from all sides and try to take a little bit from each piece that could be correct as your best effort at finding the correct path, but realizing that all sides will have a component or components of the correct path, and then picking from those to amalgamate and what was that? A syncretize? Is that what the word is?
Syncretize, yeah.
I love that word. That is a great definition.
Syncretize,
yeah. That I think it plays right into what we're talking about, which is
right.
Harmonizing these really disparate sounds into something that is a chorus of voices, right? These things are they seem like they're at polar opposites perhaps, or they're opposing each other, but perhaps putting all these different vibrations together in some way, sometimes they cancel pieces of each other out, and sometimes they reinforce other pieces. You can have a beautiful chorus.
Right. Yeah. Cancel each other out, emphasize whatever. Again, many times something brand new emerges from that combination of different vibrations. Like, all of this really seems to, lend itself to this direction that we're trying to go in, I think, overall with the podcast. So yeah, fun how all these things kind of tie together. So to just kind of pick up from last time, I ended with this story about just happenstance. We're getting ready to leave our house, and a neighbor comes up and asked if we'd like to sign a petition to add some measures to a ballot. And I started asking what kind of measures, and it became pretty clear pretty quickly that these were things that maybe I disagree with. And it just ended up being this really great opportunity to practice these things that Irshad Manji talks about, like moral courage and, taking a deep breath. All these things tie in, I think, with what we've talked about, subconscious, and just kind of recognizing, okay, well, I do kind of feel a little shaky. Oh, okay, well, that's just the adrenaline, right? Like I don't have to act on that. I can just kind of set that aside and take some breaths and really seek to understand, like, where is this guy coming from? Because chances are I have an opportunity to learn something that I didn't know about earlier. And I'll probably be better off for being curious than to just, let this adrenaline take over and say something that later I would regret or whatever. So I would say
before you go forward, everybody
Sure.
listening, please, if there's even a single soul listening, shine a bright light on that moment. That is the key.
Mm.
That is the
Yeah.
key. And can it be replicated to an entire group of people, a group of friends? I believe it could. Could the group of friends replicate it to a group of towns, and towns into states, and states
Right.
into the country? This is the key. Everybody listening, this is the key. This is the key. This is the moment to go through the moment and not lose your
Yeah.
idea.
Because, the more, and again, it's not like, oh, I did it once, I won, victor. It's about, it's about waiting, updating the weights in your subconscious model. So then next time it's a little bit easier, and the next time it's a little bit easier, and the next time, and then maybe after a year you kind of recognize, hey, I'm kind of starting to get good at this. You know what I mean? So it's a lot of work, I believe, but if you got to start somewhere, right? So it was really, fun coincidence of timing or whatever, the way everything kind of comes together 2 days before we're going to talk about this. Like, here, the universe is like, here, have this conversation, see if you can walk your talk and stuff. So that was fun. So I want to kind of go through, I guess, some of the things he was talking about. There was one aspect in particular I'll maybe dig into specifically, but it was, these measures. I think there was two, and one was specifically about what schools should and shouldn't be able to communicate with parents of the kids going to that school. And then I think the other one was around sports. But through this conversation, it was very clear that he, was aware of many aspects that was in his, mind, like justifying why he's in favor of these laws. And one of the things he mentioned was this art club movie. He said, have you heard about art club movie? And I had not. And he encouraged me to watch it, and I did. And I'm glad I watched it. It was honestly, within the first 10 or 20 seconds, I kind of had, I would say, a healthy skepticism stirring in my head about where they might be going. It starts with the, clips of what you're going to see. And, it's one story. It seems, in my opinion, is very one-sided. And I remember during the conversation with my neighbor, which I hadn't seen this movie yet, but just organically, this quote that I love dearly from Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who's the Nigerian novelist. She has a TED Talk about the single story. I shared that with him. And I'll read it again because I love it so much. It's, the single story creates stereotypes. And the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. So I shared this quote with him and just kind of, do you have any thoughts about that kind of a thing? And I haven't seen my neighbor since that first conversation, but in my mind, I'm thinking, I can't wait to ask him, hey, do you remember that quote? Did you by chance think about that? Because in my opinion of after watching this movie, it's one story. It definitely doesn't paint the whole picture about what trans ideology is. It paints one story. It didn't convince me to sign this petition, but I'm still like willing to have more conversations if they happen with my neighbor or anyone else. So I can give you a synopsis about the one story that's in this. It's a family. that moved to northern Colorado right before COVID. You know, they closed on their house like the day before lockdown started. And so there was, struggles like everyone had with kids and schools and who can go and how are they going to do this. And that was, part of it. And then eventually the kids did go back into school. And one day, everything's fine. One day their oldest daughter goes to school. I think she was 12 at the time. Came home and said, "Hey, I went to this art club thing after school," and she came home with a trans flag, and she was just like, "And I'm trans." So it was 0 to 60. Everything was just kind of normal or whatever in the morning. In the afternoon, she came home and she said she was trans. And so the movie is about, how they dealt with that. And again, it's very one-sided. I try to, I'm trying to keep an open mind, and I don't even know if I would encourage you guys to watch it. I shared it. I didn't want to say much in the text.
I did watch it, by the way.
Did you watch it? Oh, cool. Okay, good. So then maybe I don't have to, I don't know. At any point, if you would like to chime in, like, please do so. But I guess where I'm going to try to steer our conversation is some of the questions and stuff. And again, within the first 10, 20 seconds, I feel like I had this healthy skepticism. And I watched it in segments, and after the first segment, it was 20 or 30 minutes. I was running on the treadmill watching it, and I just was like, I wonder what happens if I Google art club movie fact check. And there was several links. I didn't look through all of them, but I pulled up one that posed a question I thought was really interesting. It was from a university in Denver where they did a screening of this movie with the filmmakers, and students were there. And this article, I thought it was really well written because it posed this question about the difference between freedom of expression and academic integrity. And so in the movie, there are multiple times where the parents, most of the movie is the parents talking, but then there's other people being interviewed. There's like a journalist, and there's many times there's a licensed therapist, I think one or two licensed therapists, and they're making claims. Like, for example, at one point, I guess this is the mom that says this, but this example just popped into my head. The mom's like, this hormone therapy, they're giving medication to kids that cause bone loss and cause cancer. And she doesn't explain what those medicines are. She doesn't point to any research. She just says it. And so this question about academic integrity versus freedom of expression, the way this article was written was so interesting that they said, I'm going to read just quote from it. Not citing a source in a paper can lead to serious consequences. Again, this is in terms of if in the university setting, if you're writing a paper about something, not citing a source in a paper can lead to serious consequences, and citing a weak source can lead to a bad grade on paper. But outside of the classroom, this value can come into serious contact with the freedom of expression on campus, and there are no avenues for remedy when this happens. And I thought that was a really brilliant way to sort of, encapsulate what I saw. I don't think it really was about proving it. It was about telling this story. I don't know if you would agree, Bob, but I felt like the story in this movie is, and they say multiple times, this is happening everywhere in public schools. Take your kids out of public schools. Your kids should not be, they're very clear about, like, this is a bad thing. This is doom and gloom. Do not have your kids in public school because public schools are making your kids trans. And it wasn't about, and here's why. It was just, here's why, here's what we're saying. And we don't have to really explain why we're saying it. But it is a religious thing. I will say that, at the end, it's just like, and of course this is against God. This is not Christian values. So that's the angle they're coming from. So I've been talking a lot. Bob, you said you watched it, and I'm curious from both of you about that. Where is that line between freedom of expression and academic integrity? So I yield the floor.
I'm going to just start with an Isaac Asimov quote that I've always loved, and it is, anti-intellectualism has been a constant thread winding its way through our political and cultural life. nurtured by the false notion that democracy means that my ignorance is just as good as your knowledge.
Wow.
And that's, to me, speaks highly to replace the word ignorance with feeling, because that's what it is. That the way I feel about a subject is just as important as your knowledge about it, and that's just not true. It's harmful. It's
I think it can
harmful
be
to society.
harmful.
You know,
especially if it's coming from a place of like, you can't have that freedom. I can, because, you know, I'm saying it's because I'm a Christian and God made it that way. So that freedom is okay for me. But your particular experience, which is different, that's not okay. You don't get that freedom. That's where I think it's not helpful at all, you know.
Yeah, and so much of this, I think, stems from religion and from cherry picking religious texts. And the problem with doing that is, for every cherry picked quote from the Bible you can find that says being gay is wrong, I can go right back to the quote from Jesus himself that just says, love your neighbor as you love thyself. And there's no exceptions to that. He never
Right.
says,
He doesn't say except if you're gay.
unless
Yeah.
they're gay or Democrat or Mexican or black or Jewish.
Yeah.
He doesn't say any of that. He just says love
Right.
your neighbor.
Can I
So
share real? Oh, yeah,
that's
go
the
ahead.
problem with using something like the Bible as the framework for your opinion, is that I can turn that around and use that same document against you. So maybe that's not the document we should be using to create legislation.
Yeah, well said. I will say, you know, and I don't think it's like a exclusively religious thing, or just because, and I'm saying this because we just went to our Pride Parade last 2 weeks ago now in here, and there were at least 3, maybe 4 churches walking in the parade. We welcome everyone. I even saw a poster, a guy who had of Jesus, and it says, actually, I love the gays. So I don't think it's like just a religious thing, but there is a group of it, a subset or whatever of, like you said, Tucker, this, I don't actually know if I can I want to try to understand, but it's hard to kind of wrap my head around, like, why this? Why is this the thing that is just, well, we can't have that. It's doom and gloom, you know. Anyway, Bob, yeah, anything percolating in your brain on this?
Let me just start with kind of an offshoot. This is maybe a bit of a random anecdote or random feedback on the film. I will say I do appreciate one thing, and I agree with you, John, that it was, you know, essentially a proselytizing work. So hypocritical in that it's saying, take away this one avenue of cultural perception and insert this other avenue of cultural perception, both being arbitrary.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense, right? They're saying,
yeah, totally.
Subtract out this culture, this concept. So back to the last podcast, you know, our culture is this historical shared symbiotic relationship with adaptation, this informational level of how we adapt and navigate our way through the world. And so it's saying, subtract out this one version and insert this other version, which to me both are arbitrary. They are all arbitrary. There is no non-arbitrary level, so they're all arbitrary. You can argue for either one, of course, or multiple versions or any other new version, but they're all the same thing. They're just an informational layer of one guy or one lady saying, hey, this is how I think, you know, we should adapt to the current environment. And the other side saying, no, I think this is how we should adapt to the environment for success, and et cetera. So they're all essentially arbitrary subjective points of view. But here's what I did think was powerful, in that they did not put a bunch of soundtracks behind the testimonies. and I'm just going to shine a little light on this thing. I think it's very important to feel when you're being pushed or pulled or controlled on this one layer, very specific, which is the soundtrack layer. So there's not to say that the thing in and of itself in totality wasn't propagandistic, which it is. Obviously, it has a point of view, and it's trying to compel the viewer. It wasn't like they were, to John, to your point, they didn't have various positions all arguing their point of view. It was all one point of view. It was a singular point of view about the topic at hand. So it was not a debate. There was no, there was no push and pull of ideas.
Right.
It was one idea. But my point is, I think there was only a couple times where I felt it's like in a movie when the climax comes and the music swells and everybody gets that feeling, But I felt that they did not do that. They just let the people talk and express themselves. I mean, it's obviously a produced thing. It's been edited, but it felt like at least it was dealing on the informational layer. All the set pieces were mostly just people sitting down, dressed normally, or maybe just suit and tie or something. But there wasn't anything like extra. So I did appreciate that.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, keep going.
I was gonna say, I didn't feel like it was too much of like production level, interesting, like when you watch Star Wars and they do like the sweeps, to cut from one to the next, it compels you. You know what I'm talking about? Like the wipes and stuff. And they do, like, there's editing tricks that happen. And if you're not aware that this is happening, you feel a certain way without knowing why you feel a certain way. And that, without the words themselves, compels you to feel something.
Yeah.
The soundtracks. And I noticed this a lot. I'm going to do a callback to, I don't know if you guys ever listened to This American Life. I'm sure if you guys are familiar with This American Life. This was used to be on the radio. Now it's its own podcast. NPR. I want to say this thing's 25 years old, guys. I believe I'm an older guy, so 25 years old is probably not that long for me. But I want to say I started listening to this like 25 years ago on National Public Radio. And it's Ira Glass is the creator producer, and it's out of Chicago. And what it does is it tells these stories, usually variations on a theme. So you'll have 2, 3, 4 stories that will come about all on the topic of the theme of the show itself. But my point is, what was so interesting and revolutionary at the time was adding soundtracks, adding backing, adding music, and the influence, the amount of impact and evocative feelings that would come about by adding this soundtrack. Because NPR used to be very dry and, just the fact, quiet little voices, and, everybody talks real quiet, just like this. Like this, like the SNL skit, like that's so funny. Like the SNL, they mocked NPR people. Anyway, the point is, I really did appreciate that they didn't go over the top. Now it was completely one-sided. And
so sorry, I'm trying to be patient. I have so much to say.
Please, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, okay, so in real time, in the moment, like here's an opportunity where you use the word soundtrack. So maybe I'm not thinking so much soundtrack as much as sound effects, but my experience was the opposite, truly. And then so I was like, okay, so what did I miss? And then I hear you going through this, and it's like, I bet that was there. The reason I think why was my experience different? And I can tell you exactly one moment where I just was like, get the fuck out of here with this. What are you doing? And it was when they were talking about the trans flag, and there's a graphic on the screen of the trans flag, which is pink, blue, and white stripes. And it's not silent. It may as well have been the fucking Imperial Death March from Star Wars. It was like, duh, scary, like, oh my God. And it's exactly what you're saying. Like, that stuck out to me, and it probably did overwhelm like any of the silence that was there, because I was like, come on, why are you doing this?
I would
You
say
know,
mostly. I think you're right that there were injections of this, but I would say yes, exactly. That
maybe
is
sound effects versus soundtrack, but yeah, it was
no,
like,
no. I think that's exactly what I'm talking about. Where it's contextualizing with a editorial, but it's not doing it with words. So it's not
yeah.
verbalized the editorial. It's
And meanwhile, in
contextualizing.
contrast, anytime they mention God and this is all God, it's, happy music, triumphant, everything's great. The hypocritical thing for me was that, again, like you just said earlier, Bob, like cut and paste cultural things. It's all kind of arbitrary anyway, right? But when we say it, when we're talking about this particular arbitrary thing, oh, how dare they? And they were saying that this art club, was, and even the trans ideology, the agenda, right? It's all rainbows and unicorns and everything's great. And in my mind, I'm like, that's the exact same thing you're doing when you're talking about God with triumphant music. Like, what are we trying? Like, what's the point of all this? What are we getting to if it's just, oh, how dare they? I definitely got that, and I can appreciate, like, this, of course I did. I have the last 4 years. It was about 4 years ago that when Jay first mentioned gender dysphoria and stuff, and it's been a long process. We can maybe go into detail eventually, but I've been thinking about this, basically this brand new thing that I had no reason really to think about prior to that for like 4 years. And so yeah, I probably am a little on the defensive sometimes when these narratives and these angles come out, that just seem very double standard, two-facey to me, and I'm just like, okay, again, well, okay, that's the story you wanted to tell. Whatever. Anyway.
So,
Well,
did you ever say, because I don't, it needs to be on the record, what was the actual petition for? Because I think we also need to talk about that.
Yeah. So, and this does bring up a question I wanted to pose. And my neighbor specifically was saying that schools right now, they don't have to tell parents if the kid comes to school and is like, hey, I want to try these other pronouns, or I want to go by a different name. The school does not have to tell the parents. And the petition, I think, is to put a law in place that they have to tell the parents. And so one of the things that my neighbor said is, these are decisions that are going to affect their destiny, their future, and they're too young. A 12-year-old is too young to make decisions about gender that's going to affect their destiny. I'm pretty sure that was, almost word for word with what he said. So the question I have for both of you and myself, like, well, what age is a human able to make these kinds of decisions?
Well, okay. First of all, like, I don't see the harm in it at even 12, because they're just words. That's all it is. They're just words. Like, 12-year-olds going back as far as you want to look at humanity have nicknames that are not their given name. They call each other, slurs, and there's all sorts of make believe that happens at that age. So I don't see the harm in, it's imagination in some ways. It's kids struggling to find out who they are. And at that age, if as long as it's just words, like, what's the real harm? Like, kids say awful things to each other at 12 years old. Like, that's the least of my worries. And I know I'm not a parent, but it's like I'm a student of life. There's so much worse that can be done to a kid at 12-year-old than letting them go by a different pronoun. They're just words. But the thing is, this modern movement is very caught up on, like, well, I'm a straight white male, and so we built this society and we should be in control of the narrative. Okay, and being a straight white male, that should benefit me, right? But I don't care, because you picked 3 traits that I literally have no control over. I don't. I was
Seems
just
more
born that. I was
exclusionary.
just born that way,
Mhm.
and I don't want to be reduced to just those three traits that I had no control over. Because when I look at the big picture, we're all human. And all these words that we use to describe ourselves are just splitting humanity, which is the opposite of what we should be doing.
Yeah, I
You know,
can get
like,
behind that for sure.
I just don't, it's all fear based. And the fear is just, I'm sorry, it's just lack of reflection and lack of education. Like, none of this is going to hurt you. Like,
Yeah.
I hear all these people talk about they're shoving it down our throats, and I'm like, hey, I'm a straight white male. I don't feel that way at all. Like, does my voice not have the same weight as yours? Like, you're saying it's being shoved down your throat, and I'm saying no, really has not affected my life at all.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, yeah. Bob, what about you? Like, any thoughts about that?
Let me
What?
pick up on something, if I may, here, because I think this is back to the theme of what we're trying to do with definitions.
Hmm.
And understanding that we may have, I'm not saying we do, but we may have multiple uses of the same word. This is off your show notes, obviously, John. Multiple
Yeah.
uses of the same word in different contexts drastically change the intellectual points of view. But if they're not addressed up front, it's essentially just people talking past each other. And I don't think that's happening here, but I do want to put this idea out there and see what you guys think. Because I think fear is used a lot in this conversation. But I don't hear respect used. And I want to go deeply, and this is kind of my own, I'm sure there's a, Webster's definition of these words. But let me put my words out there, what I think of between fear and respect. And I'm going to use a thought experiment of being off in the woods. So like a primitive band of humans living out in the woods or the jungle or some mountain or some valley somewhere. Fear would be if someone stronger, more powerful can do me harm. I would fear them. And in the context of in a team, I would do what they said because I know that they could bash me over the head or rip me in two or chew me to pieces or something. So I'd be fearful of being harmed. Therefore, I would do what they said. Respect is the same band of humans out in the woods. And I'm going to do what the person tells me to do out of respect, not because I think that they are going to harm me, but because the benefit that they convey upon me or the protection they give me would prevent me from being harmed. In that, imagine someone tells you to do something and you respect them and you do it, not because you think that they will harm you, but you think they will walk away from you. Like, let's say you have a map and you're trying to find your way through the woods and only one person can read that map with the compass. And that person doesn't have to hurt you to cause harm to you. They just have to walk away. So when everybody goes to sleep, they just grab the map, grab the compass, they walk away. Or they just leave it there, they got their own and they don't need it anymore and you can't use it. So in both instances, the individual wants to be led by somebody, but one is fearful that they will harm me if I don't do what they say. The other one is respectful that this person will remove their benefit or protection from me if I don't do what they say.
Mm.
What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, did you say that the people coming in, are they explaining we're here to do this, or is this all in the thought experiment just on the as I'm the person?
It's a naturally evolving response to the two conditions. So someone comes in and they threaten you that if you don't do this, I will do this to you. And the other one is an implied threat in that I respect you because you don't have to do what you're doing to help me. You're giving me a gift of life. You're giving me a gift of food, of shelter, of protection. And I know you don't have to do it. There's no requirement. If I were in your position, I would be the one choosing, meaning I can provide my benefit to anybody I choose. It's not forced, but I love you and I give it to you because I want you to be a part of the team and succeed. The other side is maybe I don't love you. I just want you to do what I'm telling you to do. And if you don't do that, I'm going to harm you. You don't have to wait about worrying about anybody else. I will harm you if you don't do what I tell you.
Thus, you should be fearful of me.
Exactly.
I think that's what. Yeah, that's to me. That's I like. I love that you use the word love because it kind of makes me think back to the divine dichotomy I mentioned last episode, and everything can be traced back to fear or love as the root thing of it. But and I appreciate in that the episode you're like, so how would you define those? And I'll be honest, like I think I've had those. I don't know if you've seen the memes where you're kind of like the dude's trying to sleep and the brain is like cringe memory, and then you're like wide awake. I haven't been like wide awake, but I was thinking back, like I think I struggled trying to like define that. I hadn't really thought about how would I define that. So I like your thought experiment here, where you didn't necessarily use the dichotomy of fear and love, but threat and so I don't know if this is where you're going, but for me, the way I'm internalizing it is, especially at this stage in our evolution as a species, I feel very confident that, the non-threatening approach, you don't have to do this, but like, hey, I love you. This might, that there's much more likelihood.
Just so we're clear, there is an implied threat where if you do not follow what the leader says that you respect, harm will come to you. That is the belief. Harm will come to you. It won't be by the person that you respect. They're just going to withdraw their benefit or their protection. But there's still this is really important. In the adaptation, it's not just like, I love you. Everything's gonna be fine. Do what you want to do. That's not the hypothetical. And I understand love, can be unconditional and it could be everything's going to be great and we will love each other and love all people and love all things. I get that. What I'm saying is you have to make a choice as the follower, what kind of adaptation you're going to do. Because if someone's presenting fear to you, meaning I'm going to harm you, you have a choice. You could run away.
Yeah.
You could go do your own thing. You could fight back. You could do other things. Yes, go ahead.
Can I add into the thought experiment here a very specific thing? Maybe a native tribe and then a more civilized, I guess, culture comes in and says, hey, there's this virus called smallpox that's going to wipe out your village, but if you take this vaccine, you'll be okay. And one approach is like, you have to do this or you're going to die, that more threatening thing. And the other, I think you're describing, let me know if I'm way off here. I might be way off here. But the other one is like, you don't have to, you probably should take my word for it, but I'm not going to force it on you. You can choose to just say no and run off and, well, good luck or whatever. Is that similar or am I way off?
Let's use a simpler one. I hear what you're saying, but let's use one that's very simple so we can adjust one variable here. I have a sword. You're in a band of people. Nobody else has a sword. But there are other bands of people outside of our organization or our tribe. I could take that sword and say, if you don't follow me where I'm going today, I will cut you in half with this sword. The other one is, if you don't follow me, I will stop protecting you with my sword from the other people. So the sword is both protection against the enemy, because you have another tribe that is trying to populate the same valley or the same mountaintop. And you're at war because only one tribe is going to keep that piece of ground. They're not going to, in this thought experiment, they're not going to come together and merge into a super tribe. Okay, it's either them or us. This is where it starts, guys. It's them or us. Okay, it's you, me, and them. And so they are out there. We are in here. Now, how do we organize the team? Either I'm going to take this sword and cut you in half if you don't do what I say, because I'm using you to protect myself. I'm telling you, you're going to go here and you're going to do this and you're going to do that because I think it's my best strategy to adapt to the situation so that I, the guy who has a sword, am left standing. The other way is I'm going to fight on your behalf. I have this sword and I'm going to go out and meet the enemy where they're at. When they come at us, I'm going to go meet them with my sword and my strength and my cunning and my power. And I'm going to put my life on the line for you. So I don't know if you guys remember this. I talked about this a long time ago about the lion, the pride of lions. Okay. And we had this conversation about what would win in a fight, a bear, a lion, or a gorilla. Okay. It's very silly, but the reality comes down to the lion is the one that wins because the lion gets angry. And the lion gets angry because without knowing consciously, without understanding intellectually, when one lion takes the place of another lion, all the cubs get killed. And so in nature, there's about a 75%, I'm making this up, I think I'm close, I don't know if I'm correct, about 75% fatality rate when two male lions come together and fight in the wild. And it's a succession of prides where the females are essentially the win or the loss, and the territory is the win or the loss. But what's expendable is the male and the cubs. So the male will fight to the death, which doesn't make any sense evolutionarily. It must, like the gorilla doesn't fight to the death. The bear doesn't fight to the death because the enemy doesn't kill the offspring of the bear or the gorilla.
Mm.
But the nature of the pride is the male lion, once he's deposed, the new male lion kills all the babies. And then that brings all the females into estrus or into heat. And then he mates with them and creates a whole new population. And what ends up happening is the males are ferocious as an adaptation to get them to fight beyond their individual needs. It doesn't make sense to fight to the death. It doesn't make sense. This animal can run off and go do whatever it wants to do. So there's a difference there between a group of organisms that are collectivized under fear or a group of organisms that are collectivized under respect.
That's very deep. And, it's interesting because you use the word anger, and it sparked a memory that was one of the turning points in this art club movie, was when the dad got angry. He was reading through his daughter's texts, and the texts were saying, my parents don't understand me, and I'm this, whatever. And he slammed the phone down, and he was like, is this really, he used the word anger. It didn't sound like he was, furiously yelling at his child or anything, but he used the word, I got angry. And he's like, if I wouldn't have got angry, and that was the point that they were making, if I wouldn't have got angry, nothing would have changed. And it was like, thank God if he got angry. When you're describing this evolutionary thing with lions and stuff, and I'm just like, wow, man. And it is, if you're under this umbrella of fear that like everyone's out to get you, and as long as you're with God, everything will be okay. But all these people that don't agree with you, they're out to get you, and you got to take your kids out of public school. I'm starting to drift into, I guess, a narrative I don't want to feed too much. I want to try to be more open-minded, you guys. I want to try to be like cool and chill about this stuff.
See, this is where I think,
you know what I mean? It's just like,
well, this is where I think it gets interesting, because I think people who disagree can agree on the terms before it gets into the reality of the thing. Once it gets into the reality of the thing, and you're defending your family, John, and someone else is defending their family, there's no more reality. It's all going to be us.
No more reality, or no more like hypothetical?
No, there's no more reality. You will defend your family regardless of what anybody tells you or why. Nothing will change your mind. Nothing will convince you otherwise. If your belief is that your family is threatened or in danger or whatever, you are going to do what needs to be done. And the ones in deep history, our ancestors who were unwilling or unable to do that, they have disappeared. So we are a product of creatures that disregarded the reality at the point of, I need to win no matter what. Losing is not an option. It is life or death. And so then these things start bubbling up once you get to that application of what we're talking about. So what I'm hoping is we can agree that a team that is controlled based on fear is different than a team that is controlled. And by control, I mean there's a leader, there are followers. Okay. So a team that is structured where the leader is causing fear to the followers is different than a team where the structure is that the leader is respected by the followers.
It's like, can you say that again?
Yes. So I'm trying to just take all the specifics out and say, can we agree in principle that we would like to see a team that is organized based on the leaders deciding what happens and the followers following is different based on fear versus respect?
Sure.
Yeah.
You know,
So now,
and interestingly, like our closest genetic relatives, chimpanzees, go to war much like lions do, where they will attack any infant, any male, eradicate that whole bloodline, and basically wipe out those genetics so that they can mate with the existing females of that tribe. And I think where we are in a modern society is that we're still pretending like that's necessary when it's not. We are still acting like we are in a scarcity situation when that's not the case. There's enough for everybody.
Yeah, I'd certainly feel more confident that back to Bob's analogy, the respect foundation seems more helpful in the long, again, at this point in our evolution, right? Like,
hold on one second, guys. I agree with you both, and I think you're in the right direction. But don't discount the reality that people are making decisions based on how they feel and their subconscious decision making of what's best for them based on evolution of millions of years. And what we have at our disposal, correct to Tucker's point, is no scarcity, and to John's point, no reason to fear each other in general. And yet that is still what is happening. That's what I'm saying. We are discounting the fact that we can be rational actors. And I'm saying, no, we most likely cannot. Not in the short term, not without a lot of help and training, not without a lot of examples and conditioning to pull us up and out of this ancient adaptation.
Yeah. In many ways, it's so similar to what we were talking about before we started recording, in the work of an individual to recognize what's happening in their subconscious and their conscious. And I think, I mean, I would say lately I could describe myself as, eternal optimist. You know what I mean? I want, and so of course I'm gonna like have this point of view that we can get there. Maybe it's not going to be in our lifetime, maybe not even my kids' lifetime, maybe it's multiple generations from now. But I think, it wouldn't happen overnight anyway. But
what I'm talking about is the model of each other's behavior now. I don't disagree with anything you're saying, John. But I'm saying when you have an interaction with somebody who walks up on you with a clipboard, but that clipboard is symbolic of threatening your family, you feel a certain kind of way, my brother.
Yeah.
You're going to get the adrenaline drop, pumped up. You're going to get this heart rate. You're going to get the feeling of what it's like to be an animal and be fearful of another person. And your brain is structured that if you are other to me, then I will feel differently about you than I feel about me and mine.
Yeah.
And it works both ways. They are looking at you the same way.
Yeah.
And so without having the model in place, the map of what is really happening right now, honestly saying people are fearful. People are scared. People are driven to go away or go towards something based off of that feeling.
Yeah.
That we're missing the point.
Well, and I think it becomes completely obvious that this whole fear-based movement is not based in any sort of rational reasoning, is that a lot of these parents are still viewing their kids as their property. like not as a separate individual human who you are trying to raise to be a happy, healthy, productive member of society, but they're my kids, and I'm not going to let them turn into one of those. And
Yeah.
it's and it goes beyond just sexuality, where there's this mindset that like people have this set idea of the person their child is going to become. And that is completely irrational, because how often does that ever come to be? It doesn't. It doesn't. You cannot raise the person
Can't raise
you
yourself.
want.
You're
You
not gonna
can't,
like
yeah, you can't create the person you want, because that's just not how life works. That's not how the human brain works. And in fact, I think there's something in us that pushes back against trying to be molded against our will. Like you
Sure.
cannot you cannot beat the gay out of somebody. It's not going to happen. Like
Yeah.
it's just not. And the whole this was several years ago. We were having dinner with some friends, and it's like this whole idea that we should be involved in the sexuality of anybody else is fucking weird to me.
Yeah.
Like, and I used to have three rules. It's like no kids, no animals, always consent. Those are the three rules to sexuality. But that's actually just one rule, because kids and animals can't consent. So sexuality is just about consent. And if you're worried about anything anybody else is doing, you're kind of weird. Like, it's none of your business. You weren't invited to the party. Like, why are you
Yeah.
worried about
This is
what somebody else is doing with a minuscule part of their life? It's
Yeah.
got blown up into this whole thing where it's like your sexuality is everything. No, it's a very, very small piece of who you are. If you want to break it down into the amount of time in your life that you spend doing sexual activities, it's minuscule. Like, why have we blown it up like this is some defining feature that needs
Yeah.
to be forefront? It's not.
It's one wedge of the whole pie, and even then, it's not like the size of that wedge is objectively the same for everyone. That's the A in LGBTQIA is asexual.
Yeah,
People that just don't experience sexual attraction.
yeah.
So their wedge is probably tiny. So yeah, I'm
Why are
liking
you
where you're going
worried
with that.
about what somebody's doing at a party that you weren't invited to? Is what it boils down to. Like, nobody asked you to come. Don't worry about it. Find something better to do with your time.
so let's agree that that is rational and it makes sense, and I can see that point of view clear as day. But then prior to what you just said, I thought we had all agreed that the vast majority of our history as animals on this planet were not, behavior was not justified with rationality. Behavior was not anything but survival and reproduction and us versus them. And it was a scarcity based and it was fear based. And so I feel like the model is we agree that this should be the model, but then we're pointing fingers at behavior that follows that model by people who are unaware of what is happening.
All the more reason to have these conversations. You know,
Correct.
I didn't jot down, but the question I asked is like, what age is a human able to make these kinds of decisions themselves? And here we are, whatever, 10 minutes later, and nobody has said 13, 14. The point is, I don't, at best, having a guideline. So I use this analogy with my neighbor. I said the legal drinking age is 21, right, in the United States. But it's not like that's some magic thing that happens. That why is there legal drinking? So you can be responsible. It's like this age that we just say, this is the age when a human should be able to be responsible with alcohol. But the point I made, and I like to describe it this way, and I did this did just this with my neighbor. I said, it's not like, when a human is 20 years old in 11 months and 29 days and 59 minutes, and they're just sitting there waiting to become 21, and that minute, strikes, and now they're 21. It's not like there's some magical thing that happens in their brain. Like, now I have leveled up and I have this responsibility. Like, it's the heap and pile of sand thing. You guys are familiar with this, right?
Yeah,
Where if you
does
have
a pile of sand become a heap?
Yeah, if you do one, it's minute by minute. It's not like now, it's an arbitrary thing. It has its utility. It's useful to have something to work from. But the idea that every human achieves this responsibility the minute they turn 21 is nonsense. I said it this way to my neighbor, was like, I can appreciate the possible reality that a family is sitting around with a 20-year-old who's not going to turn 21 for a day or a month or 6 months, and they're all sitting around, and the 20-year-old has an alcoholic beverage, and yeah, it's against the law, but everything's fine. It's not like, oh my God, the world is going to end, society is going to collapse. I was saying this to him, this is funny because, Bob, you were kind of alluding to this earlier. Like, I did kind of feel like he was looking at me like he didn't know what I was saying. It was kind of interesting. Like I was describing some bizarre foreign concept that he was just like, there was a few things that I said that in that moment I was like, I think I might be saying something brand new for this guy that he just had never considered before. So that was interesting. But anyway, so back to this question: when is a human able to make? At best, we could have a baseline
Guideline.
as a guideline, as a starting point. But the idea that every human, should align to this, regardless of their familial situation, how they've grown up, it's just not useful. Because okay, so two contrasts here: art club movie, one story. The stories they don't talk about at all in that movie are stories I've heard about firsthand from people that work at Progressive. My wife and I were in a parent group for parents of gender nonconforming youth, and I've heard many stories about families who did not accept that their kid was gay or trans or anything other than heteronormative, and kicked them out of the house. So the school was the only place that they could feel safe. And doesn't that seem like an important part in this whole conversation, to not just settle on this one story that oh, this is just terrible, and oh my God, can you believe they're doing this? Okay, that's one story. And another story is, some humans, and this happened while we were in this parent group. It was just a 10-week thing. We met weekly. One time we show up, and the leader of the group, they say, we're going to talk about suicide today because one of our members, one of our youth who didn't have a home because their family kicked them out, and it was at this this nonprofit that has open hour drop-in hours, they call. So every day for 2 or 3 hours in the afternoon, it's just, if you're homeless and you need a place to just be and get some food, we're here for you. One of their members killed themselves. So I know these things happen. I believe that it's much more than just a single story. And again, the whole point is, what age is as a human able? At best, we can have a guideline, but the important thing is, I think the important thing is the human getting what they need to feel safe? You mentioned safety last time, Bob. Safe, loved. Those are major factors in this conversation. And so I don't know where I'm at. It's hard for me to be so the schools, should or shouldn't be involved. It's again, at best, that's just a guideline. I think the important thing, I hope the common ground. By the way, I do think my neighbor and I achieved this common ground about, take care of the kid, be there for what the kid needs and be helpful. And, I think most people would say that. And okay, well, what about the story I just said, where families kick their kids out? I have to believe that they're very just solid on this. Well, God doesn't make human beings anything other than man or woman, and straight. So anything else is wrong. And if they really believe, if I accept my kid for being gay, then I'll spend eternity in hell being punished, and that's their belief. Like, it's very hard for me to wrap my head around that. It doesn't seem rational or logical at all, but I don't have that background. I didn't grow up that way. Can I just say, like, oh, screw that, like, nobody should say that? I don't know. I think it's more important to have the conversations. So thanks for
Well,
letting
and
me
here's the
rant
thing,
there.
like, we're trying to make a binary decision on a spectrum again,
Yeah,
where
yeah,
there's kids who absolutely know at 10 years old they're gay, or
right,
absolutely know at 10 years old that they identify as the gender that is not lining up with the parts they were born with.
right,
Know it for a fact. And then there's people who are 40 and have been married to a opposite sex partner for 20 years and go, you know what? I'm gay.
hmm
So how do you like there's no way to set an age. It should
right,
be about supporting individuals to find their truth and to be able to live their truth as long as it's not actively harming others. And by harming, I
right,
mean there are still serial killers, and we should not be supporting them to live that
right,
truth. But the whole sexuality thing, it's just so overblown, and
yeah,
it's an easy divisive tool, and I really think it's being co-opted politically
sure. Oh gosh, yeah.
a lot.
I know. I
And
don't even want to go
part of
there.
the whole part of the whole education thing is that as society as a whole gets more educated and gets the ability to step outside the subconscious and look at things intentionally and consciously, the old power structures crumble. And there's people who are severely vested in not letting that happen.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
It's a tough
so
thing.
this whole movement about pull your kids out of public school. Well, when you look at the bigger picture, what does that mean? They're trying to defund public schools and shift that funding into these private schools where they control the narrative. And the
And they even
narrative
say, like,
is
sorry,
usually this is the religion, this is
right,
how you act, this is how you serve, and it does not foster
inclusivity.
progress. Progress.
Yeah, yeah, progress.
And
Yeah,
like I hate this whole the way we've divided society into progressives and liberals and conservatives on the other side, and I'm somewhere in the middle.
hmm
But the whole conservative mindset that we need to keep things the same is just based off of something that cannot be. You can't
yeah,
go back. You can't go back. Time moves one way, and especially with technology, there's no going back to a simpler time. You know, unless something catastrophic happens, and that's not good for anybody. You know?
yeah. And I would say, like, simpler for who exactly? Because maybe
Yeah.
this is a time when certain people are starting to be able to live in a simpler time for them because they've been oppressed. I have to share a quick story because you said, as a hypothetical, like, people that are married to a opposite sex partner for 40 years and realize they're gay. Real world story from somebody at Progressive who came out. Her story is incredible. She came out as trans as, like, a 50-year-old, 50, maybe 60, because she just recently was like, my wife and I just celebrated 40 years of marriage together. But she had come out as trans, like, 5 years ago, and her story is powerful as I could imagine, because she had this epiphany that she was so angry for her whole life, and she was just, like, not a good person, not happy, not polite or respectful to anybody, and just had this, like, light bulb. It's because she was repressing her true self. And when she came out, it was almost like night and day to hear her story. I'm sure it was a process, but what I thought was so beautiful, again, they stayed married, this couple, for 40 years, and it was in this. She just wrote about it in the internal Viva Engage is the platform. It's like Microsoft. It's like Facebook, social media for companies. And I think I've told you guys about that. It's a pretty good tool. Anyway, the story she shared, 40 years together, and she asked her wife, like, why did you stay with me after, I came out? And the wife's response was, because love is love.
Yeah.
And I loved that. Anyway, so thanks for letting me share that. I thought that was like, hey, real world like scenario that I'm aware of that fits with that hypothetical you said. It's complicated. I'll just share a little bit here. Jay's process, it was in stark contrast to the story told in Art Club movie. It wasn't like one day out of the blue he said this. The first time he mentioned it was over 4 years ago, and it was kind of in casual, just like, hey, I'm kind of like wondering about using different pronouns. And then it kind of just fell by the wayside. We didn't follow up on it. He didn't mention it again. Like 8 months went by, and then he had a breakdown about just really feeling ill in his body, and I really want to try the pronouns. Dude, small moves. We're embracing small moves here, and it's that's how our experience is. So I'd like to share 2 other experiences around this time that, again, it really helps me believe the beauty in the quote about single stories and stereotypes. So it was like an orientation day at the high school we went to. Another parent, we were like looking at each other like, we know each other. How do we know each other? We ended up meeting up like, did you work at Wells Fargo? Yeah, I worked. Oh, okay. Yeah. Didn't work together, but we recognized each other. Well, her child, when she introduced, she said, they're going by this other name, yada, yada. And as we were leaving, in the parking lot, this mom says, so is your kid kind of doing this too with their friends? They're trying different pronouns and doing all the cosplay and stuff. And my wife and I were like, no. Maybe this is a good time to mention my son is autistic, and his whole life has kind of struggled socially. So no, that wasn't his experience. He wasn't doing this with friends. He was, kind of doing this on his own and sharing. Again, I'm very grateful that he felt comfortable sharing this with us and didn't feel like he had to keep it. So that was like, okay, so there's another story. There's another way kids are kind of experiencing this. Second one I want to share is it was through Facebook. It was the daughter of a friend. I saw just one day post, all caps, I am not a girl. Do not call me daughter. Granddaughter, sister, I am a boy, this is my name. It just seemed very aggressive. That was kind of my reaction. It was like all caps. I was like, okay, that's, again, doesn't line up with the experience my kid's going through. And it seemed very reasonable for me to approach those things as like, neither one of these things are wrong. They're just different. Everybody's kind of experiencing this thing probably in a unique way. And so is there much utility or helpfulness in trying to just say, this is the trans experience, this one thing, one other thing, and then I'll relinquish. Bob, by the way, I love that word. I don't use that as enough but I love when you say that. Anyway, so, but I will relinquish after I say this. Maybe I just totally dropped my memory. What was I going to say? Yep. I got really excited about using the word relinquish, and then my train of thought completely derailed. It'll come up again, but okay. So anyway, back to these questions. What age is a human able? I think we kind of drilled through that a lot. Another one though, I'm curious.
Can I throw something?
Yeah,
out
of course. Yeah,
real
please.
If you don't mind,
Yeah,
maybe
please.
this will be such a random thought. I've been meaning to inject a random thought, and maybe this will trigger your recall on what you relinquished there. Okay. So once upon a time, and this is like not too far back, but not too close either, I think, in our shared history, there was a constraint on handedness. I don't know if you guys are familiar.
Yeah.
So once upon a time,
Constraint on a handedness.
right-handed versus left-handed.
Hmm.
So left-handed was considered a sinister trait.
Truly,
somebody,
yeah.
Yeah,
Latin
truly.
for left hand or whatever, sinister, right?
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. So, um, and so the conformity of the time was for everybody to be right-handed.
Yeah.
And then once that,
Weird, right?
well, let's not judge. Let's not judge.
Okay, sure, sure. Yeah, thank
Because
you. No, appreciate it. Yeah.
here's the point. Here's the point. Maybe in a given circumstance, there's an adaptation that everybody doing it the right, literally the right way. Okay, everybody doing it literally the right way. That was a Freudian slip, by the way. Everybody doing it right-handed, say, conferred some adaptation advantage to the population. I don't know, who knows, but let's just say, sake of argument. And then that was removed after a certain period of time, and left-handedness emerged to some level of biological distribution, and we don't even know. I don't even know I'm just pulling this out of my head right now. I just triggered like the thought of like, this is kind of symbolic of having periods of time where there's some underlying, biological spectrum of behavior, but a required. This one's kind of beautiful in that it forces a binary. We don't have a third hand. There is no other way. So you have to now deal with this as left-handed or right-handed, but we all can agree that this is a cultural, well, once upon a time, it was a cultural constraint that they would teach left-handed people to write right-handed, okay, period. And once that was removed, left-handedness became more prevalent to some distribution, natural distribution. I don't even know what it is, but some, whatever it is, it's some amount of people are left-handed. I just thought that was a interesting.
No, it's beautiful. Yeah, because it's, again, like we've moved away from thinking that that there's some negative thing, and there isn't. Okay, well, now people have different.
But once upon a time, perhaps, and I don't even know.
Sure.
I don't know the actual history of it. I would assume it's
some
sort of conformity. Like, well, it could be one of two things. There might literally be, because we have two hemispheres of the brain, and each one usually takes on different tasks, so to speak. And so your left hand is controlled by your right hemisphere and vice versa. So maybe there is something. I don't even know. But I'm just saying now it's not a problem for anybody to identify as left-handed or right-handed. It's just the way it is. And maybe, from my understanding, I don't know if this is just a wives' tale or not, but left-handed people are more creative. Right-handed people are more structured or whatever. I don't even know. It's some kind of an arbitrary thing. But anyway, the point is, nobody's fearful of left-handed people anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's there is a certain level of left-handedness that kind of equilibrates in the population, and nobody's really promoting or suppressing anymore, as far as I know. I don't think it exists. I think it's more troublesome for a left-handed person to write because it smears the ink or something. There is something there, right? But maybe if you write vertically, it doesn't matter. I don't know. Who knows? Maybe if you write right to left, that would invert. And now right-handed people would smear the page. I don't know. Okay. So now, first of all, John, did you get your thought bubble back?
I did, but now I want to, and I'm sure I can go back to it, but I love the analogy, dude. It's like, yeah, there was a time, but now we kind of just embrace it for what it is. Here's something interesting. The twin brothers in the band we played with, one of them is right-handed, one of them's left-handed. Wow, for writing, the left-hander, he plays guitar right-handed. So that's interesting. So, and it made me think of something else, because you said it for the for the example that you walked through, you kind of did say, well, here's this binary, it's right-handed or left-handed. And my thoughts immediately went to this guy on TikTok. His name's Rocky No Hands, and he's a quadriplegic. I'm sorry. I think he's a quadriplegic, but he has this apparatus that he can play Fortnite with his mouth and breathing and blowing through certain tubes and stuff. And I've only watched him a few times, but it's like, he definitely can play it. He looks like it's not like a struggle to move, and he can do all this stuff. It's really, so no hands. He has no hands, right?
That's
people that are ambidextrous, right? Like, so it's, and my point about that is like, yeah, it's every so often I feel very encouraged when I hear of and see examples and find out about examples that, don't conform to a binary, because I really think most things don't. Most things are, maybe mostly one or the other, but there's this gray area that seems like, ignoring that would be to our detriment, and maybe that's in our history, but I think we are getting to a point. That's why it makes me very hopeful. Like, just to wrap it back to the, used to be afraid of left-handed people, and now we kind of just embrace it for what it is. I'm hopeful and confident even that, a few generations from now, it'll be the same thing with sexual identity and gender identity. It'll just be embracing it for what it is, and be much less fear over stuff. So, okay, thanks for letting me go back to the thing. It was, you guys have heard, I don't have a really good example, but just the idea of a saying, an idiom. I think maybe this is an idiom of, once you go to this restaurant, you've been to all restaurants, or whatever. Once you see XYZ, you've seen all XYZ. That kind of resonate with you guys? You've heard that?
Yeah.
One gives you everything, right? So I heard this for the first time. It was one of those things that, once I heard it, then I started seeing it everywhere. And it was in the context of autism awareness stuff at Progressive. Somebody had said that they heard someone say, they were talking about their experience as parents of an autistic child. And they said, they heard this person say, once you've met one autistic kid, you've met one autistic kid. and I think that's true for trans people. I think that's true for everyone. I think I could say, once you've met one human, you've met one human. What I'm getting at is I think there's less usefulness, especially, in this stage of our evolution. I can appreciate the usefulness through our evolution of trying to singularize things for survival and stuff. But now I just think we're going in a direction where it really behooves us much more to appreciate the diversity in the human experience, and saying, once I meet, one straight white guy, I've met all straight white guys. Come on. I mean, fill in the blank. Once you met one human, you've only met that one human. Like, the chances are high, I would say, that, another straight white guy is going to be uniquely different, and you're going to be surprised by how different, and may as well embrace this possibility that every experience is nuanced.
I'm going to take it further than that. None of us have met one human, not even ourselves, because
Yeah.
you aren't yourself till the day you die, because it's ever changing. It's ever changing. You are not. We're all just the sum of our experiences. And, like, I actually told this story to somebody a while back. I remember freshman year of high school, seeing this dude, long black hair, wearing a fucking skirt, nails painted, and going, who the fuck is this guy? Like, what the fuck? And 4 years later, I was in a band with him.
Yeah, right.
It's just, it's about adapting, and you don't adapt by being rigid. I don't know.
Yeah, it's Jamis sums this up in the movie Dune. He says, the mystery of life isn't a problem to be solved, but a reality to experience. We must flow with the process. Okay, so we are kind of getting close to time. I figured it would go by quick. I want to ask one more question that I think will be quick, because it has to do with sports, and I don't think that either one of us are that big a sports person, but I think it's a very interesting question. And in fact, my neighbor posed it. I think this was the second thing the second petition. I think it had to do with, like, how to handle trans athletes in sports. So before I ask the question,
Hey,
I will
John,
just
Could I ask for a judgment call here?
Sure.
Which is, I think that might be good to start the third episode on, because I also have I've not answered I've been thinking about it, this concept of, at what age. I think I have something to contribute here that's a little bit of a self anecdote and a little bit of a maybe just a concept, and I'm afraid if I if I don't do it now, I'll probably forget about it. And
let's do that. Yeah. Are you guys
Okay.
cool to continue this in a
Yeah,
part 3 then?
for sure. For
I
sure.
think
Excellent.
so. Sure.
Because
Yeah.
that's honestly, that's my biggest gray area in this whole debate is the sports thing. And
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that's a whole separate discussion.
Nice. Okay, cool. I'm looking forward to that then next time. So yes, Bob, please hit us with it.
So first is a personal anecdote, and this is probably be far too much information, and I apologize in advance, but here goes nothing. This is a bit embarrassed just to even bring it up. It's not an embarrassing thing. It shouldn't be, but let me just go here, okay? And it's not a one-to-one. I'm just going to start the conversation of my thought process with this one thing. It's very strange that I'm bullshitting right now just to prolong before I speak. Okay, here we go. I'm circumcised.
Okay.
I never chose to be circumcised.
Mm,
It was not an offer to me to do something for me.
right.
It just happened. Okay, it was a thing that happened to me, and I don't even know what it would be like to, because I was done as a baby. I was probably, I don't know, a day old, two. I don't even know when it happens, but I have no, conscious memory of this thing occurring. But it was a permanent change to my body that I was not consulted with, and I presume there has been long-term repercussions of how it feels to be me and all the rest. So it's one of these things that I'm stuck on. Now I have two daughters, and my wife and I had to go through, because when you're about to have babies, you kind of have to think about some of these decisions you got to make. Some people might think about, do I get my kid vaccinated? Do I get
Mm-hmm.
do I keep the placenta or what? I mean, all these stuff that just pops up, right? You pick a name, all these things. What do I do? What do I do? What color do we paint the room? All these things. Well, one of the things, it never really mattered to us before. I never even thought about it really, not really before. And by the way, culturally, so in my culture, I think everybody, as far as I know, we never had deep conversations about it, but I don't think there were uncircumcised male people in my cultural grouping, as far as I know. So, it was never something that I would have questioned, and it was done, without my consent and before I could even consent. So, we have two daughters, so we never had to decide. But here's my point. I brought this up to my wife. Like, what do we do if we have, a son? And not to speak for her, but I think she's mentioned it to me in the past at first, because it's a little hazy, to be perfectly honest. I think she was, pro circumcision. I think here's what I'm trying to get to. I believe, and maybe half joshing, maybe no joshing at all. I believe she says the only time I've ever truly convinced her to change her mind was on circumcision.
Huh.
Okay, and one of the things she's thinking about doing a podcast, John, this.
Yeah.
One of the questions I think of her topic, I gave her, and I think she's included in the list of questions that guests could answer, would be, have you ever changed your mind as an adult? Have you literally ever changed
that
your
question.
position? You like that, John? I like that. Okay.
Oh yeah.
So, and she answered to me, she says, you know what? I think this is the one and only time that I can recall that I really changed my opinion. And so I pleaded my case that I have nothing against circumcision. It's not like I'm anti-circumcision, but I am not comfortable with making that choice, lifelong choice for somebody else, based on essentially an arbitrary thing. So I don't think, if someone was born with a heart defect or whatever, of course, we're going to choose for the child to have heart surgery. If someone was born with, problems with their eyes, of course, we're going to get them, the eye surgery without consenting. They don't have to consent or whatever. But I don't see that here. I don't see that there is. I know very, very much, there's a deep cultural history. This
Right.
goes back to, obviously, Judaism and pre-Christian, tradition. So I'm not, and obviously many cultures have traditions, of body scarification or body modifications and etc. It's not the one and only thing, but the one and only thing that I was dealing with. So I'm not going to say, this is the most important thing. But anyway, I tried not to ramble here. That has always stuck with me, that it seems so ingrained in our decision-making process because of the cultural layer that at least, Western boys are circumcised essentially at birth. And let me flip it around a little bit. I think what I got my wife to concede was, under no circumstances should a girl be circumcised. And why is it that way? Because in other cultures, they do circumcise the girls in various ways.
I must just be ignorant to the process. What even would that be?
So there's a couple.
Yeah, it's horrific.
It is horrific,
okay.
But
Sounds
there's a couple different ways. One is to remove the clitoral hood, just the hood. So it's a straight analogy to what we would call male circumcision, is just a hoodectomy, just taking off this protective covering for the most sensitive area. And it does desensitize and dry out then the clitoris. Another is, yikes. But that's what's happening to us, by the way. I mean, us meaning males who are circumcised.
Yeah.
Is you are taking sensitivity and function away from this part of your body. Now, you don't need it. It's not like, I'm taking your liver or whatever. So you can survive, but it definitely changes how it feels to be you. And it changes, your reaction then to how it feels to be you, et cetera. So, but females do have a variation. So just taking the hood, then taking the clitoris and the hood, and then taking the labia and removing them. And I believe there's even a case where they will create a artificial stricture in the opening of the vagina to minimize the orifice or something. I mean, there's variations, many more variations. Yeah, yikes indeed. But that's pretty much like universally frowned upon. But this other thing is not, and I was not okay with that. Like, once I really had to grasp this thing, and I reflected on, I have to make a choice. Like, perhaps I never had to make this choice, but perhaps someone would look to me and say, Bob, choose this thing. We're going to put it on you. You're going to have a choice to be made. You have to choose one way or another. And I felt a huge responsibility. I felt a huge weight.
Yeah.
Okay. So now let's go back to this concept of at what age.
Yeah.
It's a very, very deep, very powerful concept, because let's start with this. Boy, man, girl, woman. These are arbitrary. Completely 100% arbitrary terms. They don't mean shit.
Right.
Not a damn thing does this thing mean. Now, we do have sex-based differences, and you can describe those male, female, and there's, people who have in the spectrum of biology, they have components of each or neither or something. I mean, there are different variations, but let's just say mainline, the most likely biological outcome is male and female. But then boy and man and girl and woman are cultural adaptations that we use to label humans throughout their life, okay, in different stages. And then you could also say, I don't know if there's a word for it, but menopausal women or women that are post reproductive age. I don't think we have a term for that, but grandma.
Not on the gender spectrum, but senior citizen. You know what I mean?
But there is a difference in that, male humans can reproduce essentially indefinitely, and female humans cannot. So there is a thing here.
Yeah.
But there's no word for it. Is my point. There's no word, like you have girl, woman, and then the woman after she is postmenopausal. I mean, or she is menopausal. There is no, as far as I know, label associated with that. You have to describe it with terms. So,
yeah.
But here's my point. The rules, and this will probably dovetail into next week's, the rules that we associate culturally in society with how people are acting or allowed to act, how people decide or allowed to decide, is a function of where they're at in these arbitrary categories. So you brought up drinking age, John. Once upon a time, drinking age was not 21. It was
Right.
18. Once upon a time, I've been to France. Okay, they don't have a drinking
Yeah.
age. You can look
Right.
over the bar, you get served. That kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So there's so much of this voting. Okay, voting. Who's allowed to vote? Well, once upon a time, there's a very minimal landowning white males who are allowed
Exactly.
to vote.
Yeah.
Then over time it becomes, they expand the vote, etc. And then someday, I don't even know. By the way, years are arbitrary. Like it's just
Right. Time. Yeah.
Time is arbitrary. We're making these words up. We're just deciding. And so
We
what
all
I'm trying to
hallucinated that like year zero was 2024 years ago, and we're just it's useful, sure, but it's arbitrary.
It's completely. I mean, going around the sun is not arbitrary, but
Sure.
Counting that as our unit of measure is arbitrary, right?
Yeah.
So
right.
So I think we have these arbitrary cultural phenomenon, and this is why I'm gonna dovetail back to the very beginning, where Tucker, I'm going to slightly disagree with you. You were talking about the words are essentially meaningless, and I'm going to say I think they're not. I think the words are powerful. I think the words and labels, flags, identities are extremely adaptive concepts and tools, and they are extremely powerful. Now, I'm not saying I believe that there is a arbitrarily objective good or bad. I'm just saying that it's power, and power is power. And different contexts, maybe we don't need this power because there's no scarcity and we have abundance for all, and freedom is a benefit. But maybe in some circumstances that doesn't occur. Maybe in some circumstances the labels and having more flags or more categories is injurious to a unified whole. And I think of basic training, boot camp. Like there's a reason why they shave everybody's head. They make them dress in the same clothes, stand the same way, sleep the same way, prepare everything the same way. You're not a person, you're a sir or a ma'am. I mean, there's reasons why these things work. And I'm not saying they're applicable to all places, all times, all circumstances. I just think we should be aware that they're all adaptations to environment.
Yeah.
And the slowest thing to change is our biology. So it does change. I 100% believe it is an evolutionary process. It is descent with modification. And it is a spectrum. I think these things are very clear, and we can stand on that rock and say that's our bedrock. But maybe it's different in Japan than America, and maybe the 1840s is different than the 1940s, and maybe in the 2240s it's going to be vastly different because they're on the moon. I don't know. I mean, but I'm really, 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 really thinking that I'm going to tip my hand here. The problem with these conversations, meaning what do you do in the schools, what do you do in sports, what do you do in this and what that, is that drinking age, voting, is that we have to come, well, unless it's anarchy, and I don't see any examples of that, so I think we can push that to the side. I don't see any prosperous anarchist societies. A contradiction in term. Can you have an anarchist society? Is that like, independent
Good
party
point.
or something?
Look at Haiti right now.
Fair enough. So there you go. So let's just say chaos. Okay, let's just say chaos, because I think there is some. It's not pure anarchy in that you would have powerful men, powerful people controlling and grabbing as much resource and control as they possibly can. And so maybe not an organized structure, but I don't think it's anarchist in that anarchists are supposed to be ungoverned. Everybody's a complete individual. You can do whatever you want. Everybody else can do whatever they want. And everybody just has to negotiate each interaction individually. Back to this thing, it dovetails nicely, John, to what you were saying. Like, if you meet one human, you meet one human.
Yeah.
I mean, that's effectively this anarchist concept of complete freedom, but your freedom, your fist freedom ends at the tip of my nose or whatever. I mean, you could have some kind of, not kill or be killed, Mad Max style, but like freedom to do any. Here's my point, though. Here's my point, and then I will relinquish. My point is, to organize a society, we have to make some arbitrary guidelines, and we, meaning whoever sets this thing up or modifies it moving forward, sets up some arbitrary guidelines that repress the left-handed people. They repress the nonconformists. They repress the artists and the poets and the map maker. Okay, they repress these things in order to have stability and predictability. So just like on a football team, the one that wins is not going to be the one where, hey, you 11 guys, just do whatever you want. Just try to make it happen. Just do what's best for yourself. Right there, will get fucking steamrolled by an organized team of 11 that has a plan in the huddle. They agree what everybody's going to do. They snap the ball and they execute that plan. Okay, that will win every fucking time. Every fucking time. Now, are we in a football game?
Right.
No, we're not in a football game. But to deny the reality is dangerous, in my opinion. To deny the reality sets up this conflict that we have about deciding on these arbitrary rules for the entire group. And I think that's where the problem lies, how to do this very hard thing of deciding for an entire group. Are we left-handed, are we right-handed, or whatever, some kind of thing that's going to, by definition, constrict or confine the peripherals. And it's going to magnify the power of the middle or whatever. And I think that's where I'm at.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. I'll share it because it made me think of like team building kind of activity we did at work. It was just to, have conversations around this specific study that was done with airplane crashes, and I think the percentage was like in the upper 70% of crashes happen when the pilot was the one flying, and stark difference, much lower percentage of crashes when the co-pilot was flying. And the study was to kind of find out like why is that, and the findings was the co-pilots were afraid to challenge the pilot. The pilot's in charge. The pilot knows what they're doing. So there was, a lot of cases where the co-pilot like noticed something maybe wasn't right, but didn't say anything. And so the whole point of this was to, think about that and like,
Was this having to do with, by the way, John, was this having to do with Korean pilots?
No, it was, as far as I know.
I've heard this story, by the way, but it was specific with Korean pilots and their transition to using English.
Oh, interesting.
Universal language, because embedded in the culture and the language is a deferential nature to the more mature person. And this was happening. This is how I heard it. This was happening where co-pilots literally were incapable to say the words to challenge somebody.
Like physically incapable, or just because of the rules in place, like they weren't allowed to? Do you know if there was
like the words? There's just not as many words. There's not a way to express.
I see.
Like,
yeah.
So the concept of challenging an elder is like elder would be synonymous with correct.
Yeah, the senior person knows best, right?
Yeah, so you're saying, okay, correct person, you're wrong.
Yeah.
Or,
well, so
you know what I'm saying? Like it's like it would be like a cognitive dissonance, and that created a manifestly observable effect in the airline crashes. Exactly what you're talking about.
So it was very interesting, and it made me think of it when you were talking about like the football game, because I had asked in our conversation with the team was, can anybody think of an example where it actually makes most sense to defer to the senior person and not bring up something? And I can't remember if there was many other suggestions. The reason I was totally transparent, was like, the reason I'm asking is because I have an answer. Hell's Kitchen, Gordon Ramsay. I don't know if you guys watch that shit.
I have
It's
back in
pretty
the
it's
day.
pretty good. It's pretty good. But like that's one of my takeaways from it. They even use the word brigade. I think there's probably a similar thing. You mentioned boot camp earlier, Bob. But the whole point of like, it's this dinner service. It's like 2 hours or 3 hours where the whole point is just to make food that people are ordering, quickly, efficiently, correctly. So, time after time, every season, there's somebody who's like, yeah, but and he's like, shut up. Your job isn't to like tell me why. Just don't fuck up again. You fucked up. Don't do it again. We got to keep this thing rolling, right? And I thought that was like, yeah, that's an example where like the whole point is this machine. Everybody's a part of it. There's one guy that's speaking. All that kind of makes sense. But then, like you said, Bob, is our day-to-day lives Hell's Kitchen? No, no. We don't. Our society isn't Hell's
Well,
Kitchen. There's,
that's where the
what I
tension
mean?
is, though. That's exactly where the tension is. Is number one, where is it like Hell's Kitchen? Because sometimes it is. Sometimes you have
Yeah,
to
yeah. I
build a
could.
building.
Yeah,
You have to make a thing
right.
happen, and we all have.
Yeah,
We can't each build our own version of a
certainly.
building.
Right, but
And
certainly
then
not in the realms of, to tie back to the topic here. Certainly not in the realms of like, who are you sexually attracted to? Like, how do you,
no,
how
no,
do
no,
you
no, no, no,
identify
no, no.
genderly? Like, obviously,
I think
that's
you're
not Hell's
wrong.
Kitchen.
I think you're the school. So it's agreed upon. The tension isn't, let's just say at this point, of nobody cares what you do in your own bedroom. Okay, I think that's pretty much anybody who's against that. I think is kind of thrown out of the conversation at this point. But now the
Again,
tension,
under realm of like consent, like to Tucker's point earlier, consent is huge there. But anyway, yeah, yeah,
well, you know what I'm saying. Like
yeah, yeah,
it was like, nobody cares if you're homosexual or heterosexual. Whatever you do in your own bedroom is up to you. I mean, obviously, consent, of course. But you know what I'm saying.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah,
because other than that, it's criminal. So we take that out of the picture. So,
sure,
but what I'm saying is, there's two things. There's in your own society, we have to build a building. There's only going to be one of them. It's got to be built this way. It's got to be this shape, this color, this many rooms or whatever. We can't just do it the way everybody wants it done. And number two, we're still in a competition. There are nation states. There are foreign actors. There are other people who may want to come in and say, you know what, guys, you're doing it wrong. I'm going to replace you, and we're going to come in. We're going to do it right in your place. And if they get their way, that would literally happen. I'm not going to say it's likely to happen or it should happen. Obviously, it should. But I mean, we've done this. Meaning, America has gone over and replaced heads of state and taken control and said, you know what, we don't think you're doing it the right way. We think we could do it better for you, or we think you're doing it so wrong you don't deserve to do it anymore. And we're going to take over now, and we're going to put the way we think should be done. We're going to start doing it that way
yeah.
for you. So
Colonization, right? I mean, that's what colonization is in a way, isn't it?
definitely that's one aspect of it. I'm thinking of colonization at the top, meaning taking over the leader. So colonization, in my opinion, is less about trying to change the other form of governance. And maybe there's no form of governance, imposing a governance, but it's like a metastasization, like a replication of the first government. And the other one is, we're just going to take away what you do. You can still live here. We're not going to come over and be in your place, but you can't do it the way you want to do it anymore. So Saddam Hussein, like, we don't have colonists in Iraq, but we took Saddam Hussein and hung him and destroyed the government. So
Yeah.
So I think they're both kind of aspects of power control, whereas colonialization is more like, we really want to come over and bring our people, and we're going to replace you with our people, and we're going to change how you do business, and your shit is now my shit. And the other one's like, I fear you, you're dangerous, it's unacceptable for you to be who you are in this place, and I'm going to take away your right to be who you are and govern yourself, and I'm going to replace it with what I think is best.
Yeah.
So I'm getting to the point of it's all fun and games until you have to build a building, or it's all fun and games until you have to run a country or town or whatever. And this is why this is really important stuff,
Yeah.
because eventually it does come down to a decision has to be made. Are we going right, or are we going left, or are we going to split up, or whatever? And that's where the tension really becomes powerful. Like, it really guides the future and it guides the present. And I think there are extreme implications about how these decisions are made and agreed upon, or how the discussion is made.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. Certainly not a simple thing.
No,
No.
because I mean, to expand on that point, I think education needs to be modified. We've been trying this, and I think it's gotten better in some ways and worse in others, but largely we've been trying to give everybody the same cookie cutter education
Mm.
and then send them out into the world where we need 50,000 different types of cookies to make society work, and all we baked was chocolate chips.
Yeah. Well said.
And I think we should probably focus more on identifying strengths and weaknesses and educating based upon that.
Yeah.
And that looks different for everybody, and that's what makes it hard, but maybe that's where AI comes in in the future.
Yeah, right.
Because really, who the hell wants to be a teacher these days? When
It's a thankless job. I've heard that
it's
phrase,
thankless, and now you have people showing up to PTA meetings that don't even have kids, trying to get books banned because of their ideology, or it's just, I don't know.
Here's what I'll throw into this. I love where you're going with that, Tucker. I think that's right down the middle. But I want to call back to what we talked about last time. A very special example of this, which is the Amish.
Oh yeah, right.
And
use this cell phone because I told you to.
Exactly. I cannot resolve this in my head that if we're in a free society, a group of people who are not trying to convert anybody else, they're not trying to encroach on anybody else, are trying to live a style, they have an adaptation that they think is best, that is incongruous with anything that other people that surround them or interact with them believe in. And I'm not going to say they're right, because I don't believe in that. If I did, I wouldn't be on this podcast right now. Nobody would know, because I'd be out splitting wood.
Uh-huh.
So obviously I have a dog in this fight, which is I'm okay with technology. I'm okay with modernity. I'm okay with exchange of ideas and et cetera. But do I need to snuff out their culture? Do I need to put a blockade around them so they don't influence anybody else and just force them to be inside a wall?
Right.
And I don't have an answer for that.
Yeah.
Well, think about it this way, though. The Amish, as they exist in our country, only exist because of our tolerance. Whereas if our entire country was Amish, we would have been invaded for our resources 100 years ago.
Interesting.
Because they don't have the technology to defend themselves against a hostile modern society.
Interesting. I hadn't thought about it. Are they threatening, or is it just a lack of defense? Meaning people are not threatened by them because I don't think they're. I'm trying to remember the name of the sect that is pacifist. I think Quakers. Quakers are literal pacifists, I believe. Okay, so Amish, maybe they'll fight you or whatever, but they're just incapable of fighting back compared to bombers and missiles, etc. So the farmland is obviously valuable. Why not just go take it from them? That's very interesting. It's very interesting.
Well, and the truth is because their farmland is valuable, but they're already working it for free and selling us their goods. There's an actual benefit to being tolerant, is that when you let people live their life the way they see fit, they still produce. They still interact with society in certain ways that are beneficial to the greater society.
Yeah, harmony is possible.
Yeah.
I think that's the focal point, by the way. That is, so, we're not going to get into it today or tomorrow or the next day, but at some point, the political solutions that I envision, because I'm not really right or left. I guess I would call myself a revolutionary, believe it or not. So I do want to create a revolution that does exactly that, Tucker, that is able to create harmony between these atonal, arbitrary differences. Like, if we got to build a school, we got to build a school. But let's just say culturally, arbitrarily, where do you define girl from woman? Where do you define, these concepts that are literally just arbitrary things? How can we systematically create a team that can still be competitive on the football field, but yet have room for self-expression and self-identification and self-actualization? Because I think that's
Right.
where all this tension lies, is the strength of everything being the same, everybody being right-handed, everybody wearing a uniform. There is strength there. You can't say it doesn't exist. But then the flip side is the creativity, the evolution, the progress, the beauty created by the fringes. So that's where
The reality, I mean, because that is how it is. The reality is we aren't all right-handed. The reality is, like, there is all this range of nuance. Yeah. So that, actually, I think this is a good place to wrap up, because we could dive a little bit into the Amish, that specifically that if you guys haven't listened to the time suck on the Amish, like, maybe that would be good homework this week, because there's maybe not so much Amish. Yeah, maybe not so much Amish, but there's some other topics I think that are relevant to this discussion. And again, let's do that next week. And also sports. Yay, sports. So yeah, I there's two quotes I want to finish the show with. But first, thank you guys so much again for being open to having these conversations. It's just so stimulating for me, and rewarding to, just kind of be vulnerable, honestly, be vulnerable with you guys and the internet, because we're not just talking by ourselves, we're putting this out there for anybody to listen to. And if you're listening and you have any thoughts, please let us know. We're very interested to hear about differing thoughts about differing ideas. So we are here for that. If you want to get a hold of us, sendingpoets@gmail.com. So the first quote I want to share, it's from Alok, who is a gender nonconforming writer, performer. They have amazing words about this in this space, about what, gender and expression, is. And I love this quote that they say, because I'm a big fan of kindness and love and loving kindness. Thank you, Carl Sagan. And compassion. And Alok says, you don't have to have comprehension in order to have compassion. I think that's very beautiful. And then this last quote that Bob actually, and Stacy, if you're listening, that idea about, have you changed your mind as an adult? So check this out. This is from a writer, Caroline Paul. If we shift our mindset, our later years can be a time of exploration, adventure, and joy.